Hello and welcome to this video interview for Reuters Events Pharma Customer Engagement Europe 2025. I'm delighted to be joined today by Georgia Spain, Director of Oncology Digital Innovation at AstraZeneca, to explore her latest research into how healthcare professionals engage with medical education and how industry can make that education more accessible, personalised and trusted. Georgia, great to have you with us today. Thank you for coming. Just let's talk about your study. You are studying about how healthcare providers, HCPs, engage with medical education today. What did you find were the biggest gaps between what HCPs need and what pharma is currently providing?
I think one of the biggest things we found in the research is probably not actually that new to people. We know that HCPs today are time poor, they're working in constrained healthcare environments, and increasingly, majority of HCPs are reporting burnout. So when we looked at the challenges that HCPs faced, that was strongly reflected. So busy clinical workloads being the biggest barrier to medical education. The other thing that we found very interesting was the second, I'd say, highest reported challenge by HCPs was that content is spread out over too many platforms and providers. So this really means that when HCPs are making the time for medical education, the mental load on them is actually being increased by the fact that they have to find the information from different sources and piece together this sort of piece of the puzzle themselves. And one of the big things that we've kind of saw was a really interesting paradox in the research was one of the resources that HCPs are most looking for. So 3/4 of HCPs ranked treatment guidelines as their kind of most interesting resource to find, or their go-to resource. And yet majority of HCPs also found that treatment guidelines were the most difficult for them to find. So when you think about, I think, what a lot of pharma aims to do with their medical education and sort of engagement strategies of having the right information at the right time for the right HCP, there seems quite a big gap between that when we look at actually the challenges that HCPs are still facing today when it comes to medical education.
Well, let's just unpack that paradox. It is bizarre that the most sought after thing is the most hard to find, the treatment guidelines. What's your take on that? Why is that that way?
I mean, there's an aspect of, I think the treatment guidelines are obviously sort of national or sort of international, so that they're not pharma-owned resources necessarily, but knowing that these are the things that HCPs are most looking for. And when we take that into context of the field that I work in, oncology, it's not surprising that it's the most searched for item because the volume of information is so great at the moment. I mean, the number of new treatments and indications in oncology is rising 9% year on year. That's a lot of new information for HCPs to be taking in. So they're clearly looking for easy to use, digestible formats of this information, but that's also validated and helps them with their treatment decisioning for the patient in front of them. I think it gives us a really clear indication as to what HCPs are using this information for, and therefore how do we need to make sure that it's accessible for that use for them.
And one of your other key findings was that there is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all channel. HCPs are sort of mixing channels. How can the industry respond to that way of using information? How can they step up?
Well, again, it's taking into consideration HCPs are humans. Like they would do the same for the way that they access news. Like people will have their personal preferences. So that's why we say there's no one size fits all. There's no silver bullet channel that you can put everything on and HCPs are going to find and access it. So you need to, as you say, ensure that you have that diversified channel mix. Now the challenge in doing that is not adding to the noise. So I think it's more important to diversify our channel mix rather than increasing volume. So maybe reduce the volume of content, but make sure it's accessible so an HCP can access it in the workflow of their day-to-day. Because we know they're time poor, as I said. We know that they're fitting this in the morning, at the end of the day, in between patients. So we need to make sure the information is accessible on the sites that they're going to.
Now, the report covered several countries. It was United Kingdom, Germany and the United States, and all the HCPs there had slightly different takes on the questions that you asked. Could you just unpack what those were and what significance you attach to those differences?
Yeah, so we actually, when we did some of the statistical analysis within the research, it was actually between the different countries that you saw significant differences. So, for example, we see that HCPs in Germany ranked Congress much higher than their peers in the UK or the US. And really, so for example, in my role in Global, what this means for us is that we need to make sure that we're partnering very closely with the local teams, because they're the ones who know their HCP. We have a saying internally, there's no global patient, but there's also no global HCP. So it's really up to partnering with local markets internally so that they can better craft and tailor to the HCPs that they know and see today. So it's really making sure we bring that tailored engagement approach so it's appropriate for the HCPs that we're engaging with.
And how is that best done beyond the country differences? If you're tailoring for individual HCP preferences, what is the best approach for that?
To get to an individual N=1 level, you have to be data driven. And I think across the industry, it's something that we need to sort of uplift when we are thinking about that. I think there are steps towards that, and it's taking both that sort of country level approach, maybe looking at different specialties and the different approaches you can have there. So I don't believe we're at an N=1 sort of engagement approach yet. Data driven decision making will help us get there, but we can be working within a smaller group size to tailor our engagements.
Now, generative AI, huge topic, and you added that into the report. What did the HCPs tell you about their current and expected use of Gen AI when it came to medical education?
Yeah, so actually when we first did the research in 2022, we actually had a quote from an HCP which said, if I had a magic wand, rather than going to Google and getting 1,000 sort of responses, I'd want like that one answer from a trusted expert, which kind of started to allude to this sort of Gen AI concept. And this was in the summer of 2020, so before the launch of ChatGPT later that November. This is now becoming a reality for HCPs. So as you said, when we reran the research in 24, we added in questions around Gen AI, and we saw that HCPs, again, using it in their personal life, but over 80% of HCPs envisaged that they would use it for medical education within the next 2 years. I think from when we ran this survey last year, that has only grown exponentially if we look at the way that Gen AI has changed, I think, for everyone in the last even couple of months. What was interesting is one of the things that really stood out to me that we heard from some of the interviews was HCPs are using this largely because they are seeing patients coming into the clinic having used tools like ChatGPT. So they want to understand what information is being served to patients so that they can make sure they're giving, sort of tailoring their engagement with the patient, but also giving clinically relevant and accurate information to the patient.
Now, there's always a balancing act when it comes to AI in healthcare. There's the benefits and there's the risks. Can you just sort of unpack how pharma can balance those, particularly when it comes to accuracy and trust?
And that is, I think, one of the, I wouldn't say necessarily criticisms, but I think tensions around it at the moment, that HCPs are using this, and we actually do see that HCPs are predominantly using open source AI. So things like your ChatGPTs, probably, again, because it's something that they're using in their personal life, it's something that is easy and accessible to them. But we see that the information being served on there is not always clinically accurate. So there is partnering with HCPs to educate them on sort of what information is being served, how can they validate it, but it's probably working within the ecosystem as well to make sure that the information being served on both open source and maybe internal sort of AI models is suited to healthcare data.
How can you work with HCPs who are reaching out to these open source tools in the belief that these are independent sources of information, and yet give them the feeling that when coming to pharma, they're going to get the really good data, the really solid, well-researched, peer-reviewed information, and give that the credibility that it needs for them? I mean, how do you manage to partner with them? What strategies do you think you could use to partner with HCPs so that they can be best assisted?
I think it's happening anyway at the moment, particularly as I think collectively people are getting more upskilled in understanding and interrogating AI and the validity of it and sort of the trust level of it. But I think it's making sure, it is a great question, because I think what we don't want to do is amplify the sort of volume and noise that we already see in terms of information out there to HCPs. So if every pharma creates their own version of ChatGPT or their own chatbot, etc., again, you're just siloing the information. So I think there is something about how do we collaboratively come together to make sure that information is, you're not adding to multiple sources for the HCPs, because otherwise we only amplify the problem that we heard at the beginning.
That's quite a big strategic and organisational challenge, isn't it? I mean, let's fly a kite. How might it work? How might you actually get that cross-company, cross-organisational collaboration go to prevent that siloing?
It's something that we heard as a very consistent and clear call to action from HCPs in the interviews that we ran. How can pharma come together to provide this holistic treatment landscape? Because that's what they're missing when they come to pharma resources at the moment. It doesn't give them the whole picture, the context of the patient in front of them and the treatment landscape. And particularly when you think of potentially a role for digital engagement and that looking at disease education, I think there really is an opportunity for pharma to come together and collaborate to provide sort of that holistic landscape. How you do that, I don't fully know, but I think we've heard from like at events like Reuters, etc., there is that willingness from the industry. I think we now need to turn that into actual action.
It's exciting times. I mean, let's just talk about the report as a whole now. If there was one call to action from your research that you'd like to leave industry with, what would it be? What would be your top line CTA?
I think it is about, we know the challenges that HCPs face. As I said, I don't feel a lot of the challenges we've surfaced are new, but let's actually action on them and make information more discoverable and digestible for HCPs. And to do that effectively, I do think we need to respond to this call to action to provide collaborative information.
Georgia, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. It's been a really fascinating journey. And thank you to our audience for watching. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Don't forget, you can join Georgia and many other industry thinkers at Reuters Events Pharma Customer Engagement Europe 2025 in London on the 28th and 29th of October. We look forward to continuing the conversation there. But for now, goodbye.